In 1972, a researcher at Stanford sat a 4-year-old in front of a single marshmallow and made them an offer. Wait 15 minutes without eating it, and you'll get 2. Simple. Most of the children couldn't wait. They squirmed, covered their eyes, poked the marshmallow, ate it. And for the next 40 years, that moment became one of the most cited facts in all of psychology. The children who waited, the story went, grew up to be more successful, healthier, better at managing money. The ones who ate early, they were, in some fundamental way, already behind, already less. That story turns out to be almost entirely wrong. And the reason it's wrong tells you something far more interesting about your relationship with money than the original test ever did. This is the reliability of willpower as a predictor of financial behavior. And once you see what was actually happening in that room at Stanford and what it costs to ignore it, you'll look at every financial choice you've made differently. Walter Mischel was a personality psychologist at Stanford University, not a researcher in economics, but what he found in the early 1970s crossed every boundary. He and his colleagues tested hundreds of children, mostly from the university's Bing Nursery School, which is worth noting. The children were, by and large, from educated, affluent families. Mischel found that children who delayed gratification on the Marshmallow Test scored higher on sati tests years later, were rated by their teachers as more competent, and showed better outcomes across a range of life measures. The message that filtered into the culture was intoxicating in its simplicity. Self-control is destiny. Teach your children to wait. Teach yourself to wait. The marshmallow is money, and discipline is the only key. For 4 decades, that interpretation went largely unchallenged. Parents cited it. Economists cited it. Self-help books built entire architectures of advice on top of it. The Marshmallow Test became the creation myth of modern financial psychology. Then, in 2018, Tyler Watts at New York University and Greg Duncan and Hyonan Kwan at UC Irvine did something that seems almost obvious in retrospect. They ran the study again, larger, more carefully, with a sample that actually reflected the population, 918 children from a wide range of socioeconomic backgrounds. And this time, they controlled for something Mischel had not, the family environment the child came home to every day. The results were striking. Among children from less affluent families, the predictive power of marshmallow waiting virtually disappeared. Once you accounted for family income, maternal education, and home environment, the correlation between delaying gratification at age 4 and outcomes at age 15 dropped from significant to nearly negligible. The children who ate the marshmallow early weren't revealing something broken inside them. They were responding rationally to the world they actually lived in. This is the part that changes everything, what researchers now call environmental reliability. And it is the hidden variable that the original study never measured. Think about what the Marshmallow Test actually asks a child to do. It asks them to trust that the experimenter will return, that the second marshmallow is real. That waiting will be rewarded. For a child who has grown up in a stable, predictable household where adults keep promises, where food is reliably available, where the future generally resembles the past, waiting makes perfect sense. The rational strategy is to delay. But for a child who has grown up in a household where resources are uncertain, where promises sometimes don't hold, where a marshmallow in hand has historically been worth more than 2 marshmallows, maybe coming later, eating immediately is not a failure of self-control. It is an accurate read of the environment. It is the correct decision. Celeste Kidd, then at the University of Rochester, published a study in 2013 that made this architecture visible. She ran a version of the Marshmallow Test, but first divided children into 2 groups. One group was promised art supplies by a researcher and received them. The other group was promised art supplies, and the researcher came back and apologized, saying there were no supplies after all. Then, both groups were given the marshmallow task. The children who had experienced the unreliable researcher waited an average of 3 minutes. The children in the reliable group waited 12. Same children, same marshmallow. Different prior evidence about whether adults in this room can be trusted. The gap that looks like willpower is actually a calculation about the credibility of the future. Now run that same mechanism through 30 years of adult financial life. The person who can't stop checking their account balance isn't anxious because they lack discipline. They may be responding to a history in which money has always been precarious, in which the buffer has always been smaller than it seemed, in which the financial floor has given way before. The person who spends an unexpected windfall within weeks isn't weak. They may be operating on the accurate lived knowledge that money held rarely stays held, that emergencies arrive, that demands accumulate, that the system tends to take it back. Sendil Mullainathan at Harvard and Eldar Shafir at Princeton spent years studying this dynamic, and in their 2013 book on the psychology of scarcity, they documented something they called the bandwidth tax. The cognitive cost of living under financial uncertainty is so high that it measurably reduces the mental resources available for long-term planning. It's not a character flaw. It's the arithmetic of a stressed system. Mischel himself, in his later work, pushed back against the deterministic reading of his own research. He argued consistently that the Marshmallow Test measured strategies, not traits, that what looked like willpower was actually a set of cognitive tools that could be learned and unlearned. Children who were taught to think of the marshmallow as a picture or to look away waited longer. The self-control was not fixed. It was a response to conditions. "What we see is not what we get," he wrote. "The behavior is the symptom. The environment is the cause. The cultural story that the Marshmallow Test spawned, that financial patience is a fixed personality trait, that people who struggle with money simply lack the discipline gene that others were born with, is not just wrong. It is specifically wrong in a way that has cost people something." It told a generation of researchers to look for willpower inside the individual when the more productive question was what the individual was responding to. It told a generation of people who struggled financially that the problem was in them, not in the conditions around them that made the future feel unreliable. Here is where that story lives in your wallet right now. Think about the last time you didn't top up your savings when you meant to. The last time a bonus was already gone before you'd consciously decided to spend it. The last time you bought something small and unnecessary on a day that felt financially uncertain. You probably read that as weakness. You probably felt, briefly, like someone with less willpower than they should have. But what Kidd and Watts and Mullainathan's work suggests is that you may have been doing the calculation correctly, responding to genuine signals in your environment about how reliable the future felt in that moment. The question is never simply, "Why didn't I wait?" The question is always, "What did waiting feel like it was worth, given everything you knew about how this has gone before?" We built an entire mythology of financial character on the back of one study, conducted on a narrow sample of children from one of the most privileged zip codes in America. We decided it revealed something universal and fixed about human nature. We named it self-control. We made it a virtue. We made its absence a failure. And then, quietly, the replication arrived, and the story fell apart. The marshmallow is still on the table, but what you do with it has never been only about you. It has always been about the room you learned to trust, or not, before you were old enough to understand what trust cost.